All right, I want to welcome everybody to the show. And today I'm going to be going over dams in the USA. Were dams built to help the water system, or were dams built to hide stuff? And what I found out is there's 4 different locations or areas in the United States that were here at the beginning of creation during the Precambrian era. And those 4 areas all have a very similar thing going on. So was this for water and how water moved in America, or were we hiding things? Because it's very ironic that these locations where there were native people that lived in the area and so forth, a lot of these areas were flooded, and now there's certain things that have been uncovered. You know, there's 4 spiritual locations in each of the 4 quadrants of Earth. This all started up at Lake Lure. In realizing when they flooded the small town of Buffalo, and then realizing that the Blue Ridge Mountains in that area was at the beginning of creation, and then what I uncovered at Lake Lure with the river quadrants, with the monolith and so forth. And as I go around, each of these spiritual locations around Earth had some type of ancient elements in the area. As we know, in Lake Lure, they flooded the town of Buffalo. And when you look at the town of Buffalo, if you look up at the mountains and so forth, that's a 100-foot gorge there in Lake Lure. And when you look around, those mountains look very similar to like the area of Lake Mead. Look very similar to some of the areas in Montana, and looks very similar to some of the areas where the Great Lakes are, because those are where the areas have the 4 locations that were at the beginning of creation, the Precambrian era. I've always said you can find the answer to anything in the foundation, and that foundation speaks volumes. So, since the 1980s, the natives lost 90 million acres of land, and the government claimed 2/3 ownership of all native land. So pretty much 99% of all native land was taken by our government. So why would our government take 99% of the natives' lands? Lake Lure was a man-made lake, and they've had all these myths and all these things that have happened up there. Then when I lined the river quadrants, visited the vortex up there, looked at the Sphinx looking figure and the granite monolith looking each other, west and east, and there's always the name Sphinx, like a place in Montana there. I think there's a place called Sphinx Mountain. So there's always the word Sphinx is involved in these areas as well. So when I realized that the Blue Ridge Parkway was at the beginning of creation, there's a reason these natives lived on this land. And this land had balance. And we messed up that balance by building Lake Lure up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and there's some very spiritual items up there. Like I said, the bottomless pool, the river quadrants, the vortexes, all very similar spiritual items up there that we'll find around the country. So were these dams built for water movement, or were these dams built to cover up spiritual areas? And all this started from the 1880s up to 1934. Then they had the big dam era, I think from the 30s through the 60s. And obviously these dams were built for hydraulic power, because there was a lot of power needed, if you will. But why did we cover up these specific areas? We understand that the Broad River flows in between the granite monolith at Lake Lure and the Sphinx character, and it begins at the Intercontinental Divide. So there's some structure there, there's some design there, and all this stuff makes sense. So when we go to the Roosevelt Dam, was built in 1905 to 1911. It's the largest masonry project ever done in the United States, and that extended from Arizona to Nevada. It's a very, very large dam. And what's weird is in that area where the Roosevelt Dam was built, there's been a lot of spiritual happenings around that area as well. And we look at the foundation in this area, guess what? It was at the beginning of creation, the Precambrian era. So, a good lawyer told me I'm too old to believe in coincidences, so I don't know. So these things are starting to align after my experience in the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. So when you looked at the Roosevelt Dam and then you looked at the Hoover Dam, they say there was a Sphinx-looking figure in that area, and that area as well was at the beginning of creation. And there's a reason these natives live in this area. backtracking, Lake Lure, North Carolina was built. That dam was built in 1925. The Roosevelt Dam was built between 1905 and 1911. Also, up in the Blue Ridge Parkway area, in those mountains area, they found a pyramid in the bottom of the Klitsch River. Beginning of creation, found a pyramid. Why? Why did we cover these areas up? You know, like I said, was it water flow? Was it just covering up spirituality? Because when you look at Lake Mead and you have, you know, when you go to the Hoover Dam up there and you look at Lake Mead and you look at the mountains, even though the look is different, the structure is very, very similar to the Lake Lure, Blue Ridge mountain area. And you have heard of all the things that have been happening in Lake Mead with all the spiritual happenings. You know, if you suppress that spirituality by flooding it, which created Lake Mead, which was the water system for Las Vegas, there's a lot of suppression there, and there's a lot of happenings going on. So we have some spiritual activity that happened during the time they built the Roosevelt Dam. And then we had a very spiritual happenings in the Hoover Dam. And they're saying now potentially there was a pyramid at the Hoover Dam area a long time ago. So why did we cover that up? Was it for water? Cover up spirituality? Lake Lure, we have some spiritual happenings. There's a reason the natives live there. And I always heard that they would not settle around the monolith. They would live outside of the monolith, but it was known as a very spiritual area for natives. So we go to the lost city of Lake Mead, and you look at where that city was. Lost city of Buffalo, lost city of Lake Mead, and you look at where that city was in the middle there of that gorge, and you look at those mountains, which look very, very similar to Buffalo in North Carolina. I don't know. Each of these areas I'm talking about in this episode were at the beginning of Precambrian era, 4.6 billion years ago. It's foundational. The age of the place gives it more spiritual, gives it more spiritual energy because it's older with the rocks and everything. So then we go up to Montana, Idaho area, the megaliths of Montana up there. Another big spiritual area, another area that was at the beginning of creation, Precambrian era. And one of the areas up there, they flooded, I think, 134 miles of land. I think it's 2 or 3 big major Indian reservations in that area. You think about the time period, you think about the artifacts being found. We're in Montana now. We know that this area, and you can look this stuff up on the oldest rocks in the United States. You can look this stuff up and it'll show you where the red sections are. So when we go to the Montana area, you have very similar rock structures, the megaliths, that are similar to Lake Lure. Very, very similar. Rocks built, very, very similar. Spiritual place at the beginning of creation. Fort Peck Lake was the 1/5 largest man-made lake in the United States. And that lake took land from the Assiniboine, the Lakota, and Dakota tribes. And then you talk about the Tizer acoustic sphinx. The word sphinx is always popping up. And when you're at the Montana megaliths, which looks very similar to the rocks in Lake Lure, they knew there was an ancient megatropolis in that area. Why did they flood that area? Why did we flood 134 miles? And that ties into Mount Shasta. Other thing is going to the 4th place in the United States. 4th place in the United States, the Great Lakes area and Niagara Falls. Very spiritual area, huge spiritual area there. They found pyramids looking structures at the bottom of Rock Lake in Wisconsin. They found Stonehenge looking structures at the bottom of Lake Michigan. And then the symbolism of Niagara Falls and the things they found there that represented power. And that whole area has natural resources. There's a lot of spirituality going on. Why did they build Niagara Falls Dam? Why did they build these things that dammed up these areas that created unbalance? Because if these 4 locations in this Great Lake area, you can look this up, it's in red, it was at the beginning of creation. Large native population, old artifacts being found, things in the bottom of Lake Michigan, things in the bottom of this Rock Lake mystery in Wisconsin. That whole area is a very spiritual area where a lot of natives resided. Why did the natives reside there? There's a lot more spiritual energy if something was at the beginning of creation. So now we have 4 places, and you have these dams being built that took native land. So we have the Great Lakes area, Niagara Falls. You have the Montana area, and you see the very large area was at the beginning of creation. They have the Montana megaliths there, the discoveries in the Great Lakes and all the spiritual things found in the Great Lakes. Tons of natives there, tons of natives in Montana. Now we go down to the Grand Canyon, beginning of creation, tons of natives there, spiritual location. Go to Blue Ridge Mountains, beginning of creation, tons of spirituality there, right? Tons of natives there. Why? And why are we not smart enough to recognize that? If it's that simple, why would we not leave those places alone, right? And not jeopardize balance on Earth? We went the opposite direction and created unbalance. Took 90 million acres of land from the natives, almost 99% of their land. And we have these 4 locations that are very spiritual locations. And we've alienated that narrative today. Why? All this research is there. Check it out. Check out the dams. Why did we take over controlling the water system? In 1898, Roosevelt really kicked it in. He ignited and built the Roosevelt Dam. Then they built the Hoover Dam. And then they started doing these things around the country that hit a lot of things that may have told us who we are and where we're from and how we got here. I want you to go out there and do the research yourself, and you can see what I'm talking about. You can see each of these locations, and you can see that land was flooded in each of these locations. You can see that there was a massive population of natives in each of these locations. So why did we cover this property up? Why did we take 99% of the natives' land? Doesn't seem right to me. And each of these locations were at the beginning of creation. So I hope this episode made you guys think. My name is John Edmonds Kozma, CEO of Bang Productions and owner of the TikTok Live Creator Network Agency. Thank you.